Hello, this is part 14 for preparation for NSE4 exam, Fortinet. Fortinet Single Sign-On, FSSO. Single sign-on is a process that allows identified users access to multiple applications without having to re-authenticate. Users who are already identified can access applications without being prompted to provide credentials. Fortinet Single Sign-On FSSO software identifies a user as user ID. It includes IP address and group membership. FortiGate allows access based on membership FSSO groups configured on FortiGate. Fortinet single sign-on groups can be mapped to individual users, user groups, organizational units, or a combination of them. Each Fortinet single sign-on method gathers login events differently. Fortinet single sign-on is typically used with directory services such as Windows Active Directory or Novell eDirectory. FSSO deployment and configuration. Microsoft Active Directory. Domain controller, DC agent mode, polling mode. Polling mode is WinSec log, collector agent based or agentless. Terminal server agent, Citrix, enhances login capabilities of a collector agent for Forti Authenticator. It gathers logins for Citrix terminal server where multiple users can share the same IP address. As for Novell eDirectory, they have eDirectory agent mode. It uses Novell API, Application Programming Interfaces, or LDAP settings. LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. DC agent mode, or Domain Controller agent mode, is the most scalable mode and is in most environments the most recommended mode for Fortinet single sign-on. Domain controller mode requires one domain controller agent, DC agent.dll, installed on each Windows domain controller in the Windows System 32 directory. The domain controller agent is responsible for: first, monitoring user login events and forwarding them to the collector agents. Second, DC agent is responsible for handling DNS lookups. DNS, domain name services lookups by default. Domain controller agent mode requires one or more collector agents installed on Windows servers. The collector agent is responsible for group verification, workstation checks, update and login records on FortiGate, sending domain local security group, organizational units, and global security information on FortiGate. Domain controller agent mode process. First, user authenticates against Windows domain controller. So user, step 1, goes to DC domain controller with DC agent. Then goes to collector agent, UDP port 8002. Then after collector agent, TCP port 3000, it goes to FortiGate, and then it goes to cloud. Collector agent sends username, host name, IP address, and user groups. The domain controller agent sees the login event and forwards it to the collector agent. The collector agent receives the event from the domain controller agent and forwards it to FortiGate. Step 4. FortiGate knows the user based on its IP address, so the user doesn't need to authenticate. Collector agent-based polling mode. A collector agent must be installed on a Windows server. No Fortinet single sign-on DC agent is required. Every few seconds, the collector agent polls each domain controller for user login events. The collector agent uses SMB TCP port 445 protocol by default to request the event logs. Collector agent uses TCP port 135, TCP port 139, and UDP port 137 as fallbacks. Collector agent-based polling mode requires a less complex installation, which reduces ongoing maintenance. There are three options. First option is Net API. Second option, Windows Security Log. Third option is WMI. The most recommended method is WMI, then Windows Sec Log, and the least recommended method is Net API. Event logging must be enabled on the domain controller except Net API. WMI method. Domain controller returns all requested login events every 3 seconds. It's estimate 3 seconds. The interval times depend on number of services and on network latency. DC reads selected event logs. Then WMI improves WinSec bandwidth usage. It reduces network load between collector agent and domain controller. WMI is the most recommended method. WinSec log. First, it polls all security events on domain controller every 10 seconds or more. Log latency if network is large or system is slow. It requires fast network links. WinSec logs is slower, but it still sees all login events and only parses known event IDs by collector agent. Net API. Net API polls the net session enum function on Windows every 9 seconds or less. Authentication session table in RAM retrieves login sessions, including domain controller login events. Net API is faster, but if domain controller has heavy system load, it can miss some login events. Don't need to enable event login on domain controller. Collector agent based polling mode process. First, the user authenticates with the domain controller. Second, the controller agent frequently polls the domain controller to collect user login events. Third, the collector agent forwards login to the FortiGate, port TCP 3000. Fourth, the user does not need to authenticate. So first, user goes to domain controller without domain controller agent, DLL. Then collector agent periodically every few seconds checks. Then collector agent says username, host name, IP address, and user groups. And then it goes to TCP port 8000 to FortiGate. Agentless polling mode. First, it's similar to agent-based polling, but FortiGate polls instead. Agentless polling mode doesn't require an external domain controller agent or collector agents. FortiGate collects data directly. Event login must be enabled on the domain controller. More CPU and RAM required by FortiGate. Support for polling option WinSecLog. FortiGate uses SMB protocol only to read event viewer logs. Fewer available features than collector agent-based polling mode. FortiGate doesn't poll workstation. Workstation verification is not available in agentless polling mode. Agentless polling mode access. First, FortiGate frequently polls domain controllers to collect user login events. The user authenticates with the domain controller. FortiGate discovers username, hostname, IP address, login events in next poll. The user does not need to authenticate. FortiGate already knows traffic is receiving, knows the traffic that it is receiving. So if we compare modes, DC agent mode and polling mode. As for installation, DC agent mode is complex. Multiple installations, one per domain controller, and it requires reboot. Polling mode is easy. There is only one or no installations. For DC agent mode, DC agent is required. For polling mode, DC agent is not required. As for resources, DC agent mode shares with domain controller agents. In polling mode, it has own resources. Scalability of DC agent mode is higher and scalability of polling mode is lower. In DC agent mode, there is redundancy and level of confidence. DC agent mode captures all logins, and polling mode, Net API might miss a login or have a delay with WinSec log. We don't need to install Windows Collector Agent on the DC. We can install it only on Windows machine on the network. The domain name system DNS server must be able to reserve all workstation names. Additional FSSO requirements. Login events contain workstation names but might not contain IP addresses. Collector agent uses a DNS server to resolve the workstation name to an IP address. Second, for full feature functionality, the collector agent must be able to poll workstations. This informs the collector agents whenever or not user is still logged in. TCP port 445 by default and TCP port 139 as a backup must be open between collector agents or FortiGate and all hosts. Remote registry service must be needed on each workstation, which is the recommended mode for FSSO deployment. The most recommended mode is DC agent mode, which Fortinet single sign-on mode requires most system resources, CPU and RAM. Answer is polling mode agentless. Thank you. See you in our next video. Bye.